The sheriff's deputy knocked on the door at 9:47 a.m. on Christmas Eve. Elena Martinez stood in her small kitchen, flour on her hands from the tamales she'd been making, the ones Robert had loved, the ones she made every Christmas, even though he'd been gone for 8 months now. The knock was firm, official, the kind of knock that shatters whatever fragile peace you've managed to construct. She opened the door to find Deputy Morrison, a man she recognized from church, holding a clipboard and wearing an expression that said he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mrs. Martinez," he said softly, "I'm sorry. I have to serve you with a formal eviction notice. You have 4 hours to vacate the premises." 4 hours. On Christmas Eve. Elena stared at him, the words not quite landing. "There must be some mistake. I called the landlord last week. He said I had until January. The property's been sold, ma'am. New owner wants immediate possession. It's all legal." He handed her the papers, his eyes filled with the kind of pity that makes humiliation burn even hotter. "I'm really sorry. If there was anything I could do." But there wasn't anything anyone could do. Elena had been 3 months behind on rent when Robert died. Now it was 8 months. The insurance money had barely covered the funeral. The hospital bills were still coming, each one a fresh wound. $47,000 for the emergency room visit that hadn't saved him. $12,000 for the ambulance. $8,000 for tests that found the massive heart attack too late. Robert Martinez, age 59, janitor at Riverside Technical College for 33 years, had died without warning on a Tuesday afternoon while mopping the floor of the science building. And in dying, he'd left Elena with nothing but memories and debt. Or so she thought. What Elena didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the man who'd spent 3 decades pushing a mop and emptying trash cans had been one of the most brilliant investors of his generation. That the janitor who brought his lunch in a paper bag and wore the same jacket for 15 years had been worth more than most of the professors and administrators he cleaned up after. That in a sealed envelope, sitting in a law office across town, was documentation that would reveal Robert Martinez had left his widow an estate worth $1.7 billion. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, Elena had to survive the worst Christmas Eve of her life. You can't pack a life in 4 hours. Elena stood in the middle of the living room, the room where Robert had proposed to her 36 years ago, where they'd watched their daughter Maria take her first steps, where they'd laughed and argued and built a modest but beautiful life together, and tried to figure out what to take. The couch Robert had found at a garage sale and reupholstered himself. Too big. The bookshelf he'd built from salvaged wood. No room. The framed photos covering every wall, documenting their journey from young immigrants to American citizens to proud parents. She grabbed what she could. Her hands shook as she filled garbage bags with clothes. Garbage bags. The indignity of it scorched through her grief. 59 years old, evicted on Christmas Eve, packing her life into garbage bags while her neighbors watched from behind curtained windows. Maria arrived within the hour, her face stricken. "Mama, why didn't you call me sooner? I would have helped. I would have—" "You have your own bills, mija," Elena said, her voice steady even as her world collapsed. "You and James are barely making it. You can't take on your mother's debts, too." "But where will you go?" Elena didn't have an answer. The women's shelter was full. She'd already called. Her sister in Phoenix had a 1-bedroom apartment and 3 kids. Maria and James lived in a cramped rental with their 2 children. There was barely room for them, let alone Elena. "I'll figure something out," Elena lied. They worked in silence, mother and daughter, packing up the physical remnants of Robert's life. His tools, still organized in the garage, each one cleaned and returned to its exact place. His books, financial magazines, and investment journals that Elena had never understood why he read. his clothes still smelling faintly of the industrial cleaner he used at work. At 1:30 p.m., Maria found the shoebox. It was in the back of Robert's closet, unmarked, sealed with packing tape. Inside were hundreds of documents, stock certificates, account statements, handwritten notes filled with numbers and company names, newspaper clippings about technology companies and pharmaceutical startups. "Mama, what is all this?" Elena took the box, rifling through papers that made no sense to her. Dollar amounts that couldn't possibly be real. Company names she didn't recognize. It looked like Robert had been playing some kind of game, pretending to invest imaginary money in imaginary companies. "I don't know," Elena said. "Your father had hobbies, things he did to keep his mind busy." She set the box aside. It was 2:15 p.m. They had less than 2 hours. By 3:30 p.m., everything Elena owned that mattered was loaded into Maria's SUV and a U-Haul trailer James had rented. Everything else, the furniture, the kitchen items, Robert's workshop tools, would have to stay. The new owner could do whatever they wanted with it. Burn it, sell it, trash it. Elena was past caring. Deputy Morrison returned at exactly 3:47 p.m., 13 minutes early, his face apologetic. "Mrs. Martinez, I need the keys." Elena pulled them from her pocket. The keys Robert had carried for 36 years. The keys to the only home they'd ever owned together. Except they'd never owned it. They'd always been renters, always one bad month away from this exact moment. She placed the keys in Morrison's palm without a word. "Ma'am, where will you be staying? For my report, I don't know," Elena said flatly. "Does it matter?" He looked away. "No, ma'am. I suppose it doesn't." Elena took one last look at the house. The door Robert had painted blue because it was her favorite color. The window box where she'd grown herbs every summer. The driveway where he'd taught Maria to ride a bike. Then she turned and walked away. It was Christmas Eve. She was 59 years old, homeless, and drowning in debt. The man she'd loved for 36 years was dead. And she had no idea that within 72 hours, her life would transform in ways that would make this moment seem impossible. But first, she had to survive the night. The Riverside Inn was not the kind of place anyone stayed by choice. It was the kind of motel where the hourly rate was clearly posted, where the neon sign flickered vacancy, even when it was full, where you paid in cash and nobody asked questions. But it was $47 a night, and Elena had exactly $320 in her checking account. She could afford 6 nights. After that, she couldn't think about after that. Mariah wanted to stay with her. "Mama, please, let me at least help you settle in." "Go home to your family," Elena insisted. "Your kids need you. It's Christmas Eve. Don't let them see their grandmother like this. But you're alone. I've been alone for 8 months, mija. One more night won't kill me." The lie tasted bitter. Being alone was exactly what might kill her. Not physically, but spiritually. The kind of death that happens slowly, when hope erodes one grain at a time until there's nothing left but the mechanical process of existing. Maria left in tears, promising to call first thing Christmas morning. Elena stood in the motel room, a space so small and dingy that calling it a room was generous, and finally let herself break. She sat on the edge of the bed that smelled of cigarettes and bleach, and she sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest, a place where grief and rage and humiliation mixed into something that had no name. "Roberto," she whispered to the empty room. "Why did you leave me like this? Why didn't you plan better? Why didn't we save more?" The room, of course, didn't answer. Elena cried until she had nothing left. Then she washed her face in the rust-stained sink, said a prayer she didn't quite believe anymore, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow was Christmas, the day of miracles. But Elena Martinez had stopped believing in miracles 8 months ago, the moment Robert's heart stopped beating in the science building of Riverside Technical College. To understand what happened next, you need to know how Robert and Elena built their life together. You need to understand the man who mopped floors and invested millions, and the woman who loved him without ever knowing his secret. They met in 1988, both recent immigrants from Mexico, both working multiple jobs to survive in a country that promised opportunity but delivered mostly struggle. Elena was cleaning houses, exhausting work that paid $6 an hour under the table. She'd been a school teacher in Guadalajara, but here her credentials meant nothing. Her English was functional but accented. Her options were limited. Robert was working as a dishwasher at a diner while attending night classes at the community college. He'd been an accountant in Mexico City, working for a small firm that did books for local businesses. He was good with numbers, always had been. They met at a bus stop on a rainy Tuesday. Elena's umbrella had broken. Robert shared his. "You'll get wet," she protested. "Then we'll both get a little wet instead of you getting very wet," he replied, smiling. It was the smile that got her. Robert Martinez had a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the world worth smiling at. They talked during the bus ride, discovered they lived in the same neighborhood, started meeting accidentally at that same bus stop. 6 months later, Robert proposed in her tiny apartment, getting down on one knee with a ring that had cost him 2 weeks' salary. "I can't promise you wealth," he said, "but I can promise you honesty, hard work, and a partner who will never stop trying to build a better life for us." Elena said yes. What Robert didn't tell her, what he couldn't have known himself at that moment, was that he would keep that promise in ways neither of them could imagine. Robert got the janitor position at Riverside Technical College in 1991, 3 years after they married. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what he'd studied for. But it paid $12.05 an hour with benefits, health insurance, retirement matching, tuition reimbursement if he wanted to take classes. Most importantly, it was stable. In a life that had been defined by instability since immigrating, stability mattered more than prestige. "I'm going to be a janitor," Robert told Elena, and she heard the shame in his voice. "You're going to have benefits," she corrected. "You're going to have security. There's no shame in honest work, mi amor." She meant it. Elena had been raised to believe that all work had dignity. But she also saw how Robert struggled with the reality of his situation. A trained accountant with a sharp mind, spending his days mopping floors and emptying trash. What Elena didn't see was what Robert did during his breaks, while other janitors smoked cigarettes or scrolled through their phones. Robert sat in the college library, reading everything: financial newspapers, investment magazines, annual reports from companies whose stock was publicly traded. The college library had extensive databases that students used for research. Robert, with his employee access, could read anything he wanted. And what he wanted to read was everything about the stock market, about companies, about how wealth was built and multiplied. He studied like he was preparing for the most important exam of his life, because, in a way, he was. Robert made his first stock purchase in 1993, 2 years into his janitor job. He'd saved $500, a small fortune for them at the time. Elena thought he was putting it toward Maria's college fund. Instead, Robert opened a brokerage account and bought shares in a small technology company called Microsoft. The stock was trading at around $1.60 per share, split adjusted. His $500 bought him approximately 312 shares. Why Microsoft? Because Robert had been watching the computer labs at Riverside Technical. He'd seen how every semester more computers appeared. He'd listened to professors discuss something called the Internet that was coming. He'd read Bill Gates's interviews and thought, this man understands something most people don't. Robert didn't tell Elena about the purchase, not because he wanted to deceive her, but because he wasn't sure it would work. If he lost the $500, he didn't want her to know he'd gambled with money they couldn't afford to lose. But what if it worked? What if he'd found a way to build something for them? He would tell her when there was something worth telling. That moment would come. But not for another 26 years. Through the 1990s, Robert developed a system. Every paycheck, before anything else, he set aside money for investment. Not much, $50 here, $100 there. Money Elena thought was going into their savings account. Technically, it was savings, just not the kind Elena imagined. Robert studied companies with an obsession that would have alarmed Elena if she'd known about it. He read annual reports like other people read novels. He memorized financial ratios, studied management teams, analyzed competitive advantages. But his approach wasn't typical. Robert wasn't looking for hot tips or get-rich-quick schemes. He was looking for companies that were invisible to most investors. Companies that did boring but essential things. Companies that Wall Street overlooked because they weren't sexy enough. He bought shares in a waste management company that was revolutionizing recycling. $300 investment. He bought shares in a pharmaceutical company developing treatments for rare diseases. $450 investment. He bought shares in a little-known semiconductor manufacturer, supplying parts for emerging technologies. $600 investment. Small amounts, consistent investing. Companies that solved real problems in ways most people didn't notice. And he never sold. This was Robert's secret advantage. Patience. While other investors panicked during market crashes, sold during downturns, chased trends during bubbles, Robert simply held. He held through the dot-com crash of 2000, when his portfolio lost 40% of its value. He held through the financial crisis of 2008, when everything seemed to be collapsing. He held through every panic, every market correction, every moment when selling seemed like the rational choice. He held because he understood something fundamental. Great companies recover. Patient investors win. By 2010, Robert's $500 Microsoft investment had grown to $47,000. His waste management company had been acquired for triple his purchase price. His pharmaceutical company had 3 blockbuster drugs and had multiplied 20-fold. Robert Martinez, janitor at Riverside Technical College, had a portfolio worth $847,000. And Elena still had no idea. You might be wondering, how could Elena not know? The answer is complicated, tied up in trust, traditional gender roles, and the quiet way Robert moved through the world. Elena handled the household finances, the rent, the utilities, the groceries. Robert handled his paycheck stuff, the deposits, the retirement account, the taxes. It was a division of labor that worked for them, based on trust, built over decades. Elena never questioned where every dollar went, because Robert never gave her reason to. He was reliable, steady, always made sure the bills were paid. If he said he was putting money in savings or his retirement account, Elena believed him. She had no reason not to. And Robert? Robert kept his secret not out of deception, but out of something more complex. Part of it was fear. Fear that if he told Elena and the investments failed, he would have failed her. Part of it was cultural. The idea that a man should provide, should build security without burdening his wife with the risks. But mostly, Robert kept his secret because he was building something magnificent, and he wanted to reveal it when it was complete, when he had enough that Elena would never worry about money again, when he could tell her, "Everything I built for you." He thought he had time. Men always think they have more time than they do. Working at Riverside Technical gave Robert an advantage most investors never have: insider knowledge. Not illegal insider trading. Robert would never have crossed that line. but insight into emerging trends that came from being invisible in the right places. He cleaned the computer science labs and listened to professors discuss artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks. Years before these terms were mainstream, Robert was buying stock in companies developing these technologies. He cleaned the biology labs and overheard research discussions about gene therapy, immunotherapy, personalized medicine. He invested in biotech companies before their breakthrough drugs hit the market. He cleaned the business school and attended, as part of his janitorial duties, lectures where visiting executives discussed their company's strategies. He noted which companies had visionary leadership, which had sound fundamentals, which were positioned for growth. Being invisible had advantages. Executives and professors talked freely around him, never imagining the janitor in the corner was absorbing every word, analyzing every insight, making investment decisions that would eventually dwarf their own wealth. By 2015, Robert's portfolio had crossed $3.2 million. By 2018, it was approaching $8 million. He was 62 years old, 3 years from retirement. Finally, he thought, he could tell Elena. They could retire early, travel, enjoy the wealth he'd built. But first, he needed to organize everything properly, create a proper will, meet with lawyers and financial advisors, make sure that if anything happened to him, Elena would be taken care of. He scheduled an appointment with the law firm of Patterson and Associates for May 15, 2024. Robert Martinez died of a massive heart attack on April 23, 2024, 3 weeks before that appointment. Elena buried her husband on a Tuesday, the same day of the week he'd died. The funeral was simple, all they could afford. A modest casket. No elaborate flower arrangements. A brief service at their church, where Father Miguel spoke about Robert's dedication to family, his honest work, his quiet dignity. 47 people attended. Fellow janitors from the college, neighbors, family. The head of facilities at Riverside Technical gave a short eulogy about Robert's 33 years of reliable service. Robert Martinez was the kind of man who made our institution work, he said. Not flashy, not seeking recognition, just showing up every day, doing excellent work, treating everyone with respect. He'll be deeply missed. It was a nice eulogy, true as far as it went. What the facilities director didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Robert Martinez had donated $250,000 anonymously to the college's scholarship fund over the years, that he'd endowed 3 full-ride scholarships for students from immigrant families, that the man who mopped their floors had done more for the college's mission than most of the administrators ever would. After the service, people hugged Elena and offered condolences. If there's anything you need, he was such a good man. You'll be in our prayers. Empty words, kindly meant. But prayers don't pay funeral bills. Prayers don't cover the rent Elena was already behind on. She smiled and thanked them and held herself together with the fierce dignity that had gotten her through every hard thing in her life. But inside, Elena Martinez was drowning. The hospital bills started arriving 2 weeks after the funeral. $47,328, $19 for emergency room treatment, $12,259 for ambulance transport, $808 motor down $435 for diagnostic tests, $15,720 for the 3 days Robert spent in ICU before he died. Total, $84 down $340 divided by 4. Elena stared at the numbers with the kind of numb disbelief that comes when reality exceeds your capacity to process it. How could 3 days of failing to save someone's life cost $84,000? She called the hospital billing department. There must be some mistake. My husband had insurance through his job. Yes, Mrs. Martinez, but there's a deductible and co-insurance. Your portion comes to $31,447. $19. We can set up a payment plan if you'd like. $31,447.19. Elena had $4,200 in their checking account. How much would the monthly payments be? Well, At 0% interest over 5 years, that's about $520 per month. Elena's rent was $200. Her utilities averaged $200. Food, gas, basic. Expenses. She was barely making it on her house cleaning income as it was. "I don't have $524 a month," Elena said quietly. There was a pause on the other end. "Well, we'll have to work something out. But Mrs. Martinez, you do need to pay something. Otherwise, we'll have to send this to collections." Collections. The word hung in the air like a threat. Over the next 3 months, Elena watched her small savings evaporate. The life insurance, $15,000, barely covered the funeral and made a dent in the hospital bills. The credit cards she'd never wanted to use became necessities. The rent fell behind. She worked more hours, cleaned more houses, came home exhausted every night to an empty house that echoed with Robert's absence. And every night, she looked at the pile of bills and wondered how she'd gotten here. How a lifetime of hard work, of doing everything right, of living modestly and saving what they could, had ended with her drowning in debt at 59 years old. The eviction notice, when it finally came, almost felt inevitable. Of course, this was how it would end. Of course, there would be no miracle. Life didn't work that way, not for people like Elena Martinez. Or so she thought. Elena woke up in the Riverside Inn on December 26th to the sound of her phone ringing. She'd barely slept. The mattress was lumpy, the heater rattled, and every 30 minutes a car would pull into the parking lot, headlights sweeping across her curtains. She dozed fitfully, dreaming of the house she no longer had, waking repeatedly to remember where she was. The phone showed an unknown number. Elena almost didn't answer. Probably a debt collector, she thought. But something made her pick up. "Mrs. Martinez." The voice was male, professional, uncertain. "My name is Daniel Patterson. I'm an attorney with Patterson and Associates. I've been trying to reach you. Your phone number was disconnected, and when I went to your address, I was evicted," Elena said flatly. "What do you want?" "If this is about the hospital bills, I told them I'm working on a payment plan." "No, ma'am, this isn't about bills. This is regarding your husband, Robert Martinez. He had an appointment scheduled with our firm before he passed away, and in going through our files, we discovered something unusual." Elena's heart sank. More debts. Of course, Robert must have borrowed money she didn't know about. "How much does he owe?" she asked, her voice dead. "I'm sorry, what? How much debt did he leave? Just tell me. I can't pay it, but I need to know the number." There was a long pause. Then, "Mrs. Martinez, your husband didn't owe money. He left a sealed will with our firm 30 years ago, with instructions that it was only to be opened in the event of his death. We've been trying to reach you to discuss it." "A will? But we didn't have anything. The life insurance barely covered the funeral." "Ma'am, I really think we should meet in person. Are you available today? This is extremely time-sensitive, and there are some things I need to explain." "I'm staying in a motel," Elena interrupted. "I don't have a car. My daughter has my things. I don't—" Her voice cracked. "I don't have anything." Another pause. When Patterson spoke again, his voice was gentle. "Mrs. Martinez, where are you? I'll come to you. Right now. This can't wait." 2 hours later, Daniel Patterson stood in Elena's motel room holding a briefcase that would change everything. Daniel Patterson was 43 years old, a partner in his father's law firm, and in 20 years of practicing law, he'd never seen anything quite like this. He sat in the motel room's only chair, a rickety thing that wobbled, while Elena perched on the edge of the bed, her face showing every one of her 59 years, and then some. "Mrs. Martinez," he began carefully, 30 years ago, your husband came to our firm. My father handled the consultation. Robert wanted to establish a will and create a structure for investments he was making. The will was very specific. It was sealed, only to be opened upon his death, and you were the sole beneficiary of his entire estate. Elena stared at him. Estate? We don't have an estate. We were renters. The only thing Robert owned was a 15-year-old truck. Patterson opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. According to the documents your husband filed with us, along with updated financial statements he sent annually, and I want to be clear, I only opened these documents 5 days ago after confirming his death. Robert Martinez maintained an investment portfolio that, as of last month, was valued at approximately, he paused, took a breath, approximately $1.7 billion. The number hung in the air between them. Elena laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. That's impossible. You have the wrong person. My husband was a janitor. He mopped floors. We lived paycheck to paycheck, ma'am. I verified everything. Multiple times. Your husband was indeed a janitor at Riverside Technical College. And he was also one of the most successful private investors of his generation. Patterson pulled out document after document. He invested primarily in technology, biotechnology, and sustainable infrastructure companies. He held positions in Microsoft since 1993, Amazon since 1997, Apple since 2003, Tesla since 2010, Moderna before anyone had heard of mRNA technology. Elena felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "He would have told me. We didn't keep secrets." According to the letter he left with the will, he planned to tell you when he retired. He wanted it to be perfect. He wanted to surprise you. Patterson's voice was gentle. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry this is happening like this, in this place. But I need you to understand. You're not homeless. You're not destitute. You are one of the wealthiest women in America." Elena's vision blurred. Her hand started shaking. $1.7 billion? As of last month's statement, yes. The actual current value is probably higher. The tech sector has been strong. Mrs. Martinez, I need to ask, did your husband leave any documents at home? Any paperwork, account statements, anything that might— "The shoebox," Elena said suddenly. "Maria found a shoebox when we were packing. It had papers, stock certificates. I thought he was pretending, playing a game." Patterson's expression shifted. "Do you still have it?" "Maria does. She took it with the other things. I can call her." "Yes, please." "Mrs. Martinez, that box probably contains critical documents we'll need to settle the estate. But I want to be clear about something. The will is ironclad. Everything. Every penny. Every share. Every investment. It all goes to you. No one can contest this. No one can take it away." Elena looked at this lawyer sitting in her $47-a-night motel room, telling her that the man who died leaving her homeless had actually left her billions. And she started to cry. Not tears of joy. Not yet. These were tears of grief so profound it had no bottom. Because Robert had done this for her. Had built this fortune, one careful investment at a time, working his janitor job and reading his financial papers and planning for their future. And he died 3 weeks before he could tell her. Died, believing she would discover his gift through his will, never imagining she'd spend 8 months drowning in debt, thinking he'd left her with nothing. "He didn't know," Elena sobbed. "He died thinking I'd be taken care of. He didn't know I was evicted, that I'm sleeping in a motel, that I've been calling his memory a failure." Patterson moved to sit beside her, this professional lawyer suddenly just a human being witnessing another human being's breaking heart. "He knew you'd be taken care of," Patterson said softly. "And you will be. Mrs. Martinez, by tomorrow, I'll have emergency funds transferred to an account in your name. By next week, we'll begin the full estate settlement. By New Year's, Your financial situation will be completely transformed." Elena wiped her eyes. "I don't want billions. I want my husband back." "I know," Patterson said. "I know." They sat in silence in that terrible motel room, the lawyer and the widow, while outside the world continued on, unaware that everything had just changed. Maria arrived at the motel within an hour, the shoebox clutched to her chest, her face showing the shock of someone whose understanding of reality has just been obliterated. "Mama," Mr. Patterson explained on the phone, "I don't understand. How did Papa—" "I don't know, mija," Elena said, "but we need to see what's in that box." They spread the contents across the motel bed, and Daniel Patterson began organizing papers that represented 30 years of careful, brilliant investing. Stock certificates for companies Elena had heard of: Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Google, Netflix. Hundreds of thousands of shares accumulated over decades. Stock certificates for companies Elena hadn't heard of: small biotechnology firms that had since been acquired for billions, infrastructure companies that had become industry leaders, sustainable energy companies that were now worth fortunes. Handwritten ledgers in Robert's careful script, tracking every purchase, every dividend reinvested, every stock split. Meticulous records showing a mind that understood numbers the way artists understand color. Newspaper clippings about companies, with Robert's notes in the margins: good management, sustainable advantage, wait for better price, buy more, and letters. Letters Robert had written but never sent, addressed to Elena. "My dearest Elena, today I bought 100 shares of a company called Amazon. They sell books online. The stock is $18 per share. I know this seems foolish. Who will buy books online when they can go to a bookstore? But I've been watching, and I think this Jeff Bezos understands something about the future. I think he sees where this is going. If I'm right, this will help pay for Maria's college. If I'm wrong, I'll work extra shifts and we'll manage. I love you. Everything I do for you." Roberto, dated April 1997. Elena held the letter with shaking hands. That $1,800 investment in Amazon? At today's stock price, those 100 shares, adjusted for splits, would be worth approximately $17 million. There were dozens of letters, hundreds, each one documenting an investment, explaining Robert's reasoning, expressing his love for Elena and his hope for their future. "He was writing to you the whole time," Maria whispered. "He was sharing it with you, even if you didn't know." Patterson was methodically photographing documents, creating a digital record. His hands were steady, but his expression showed awe. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to tell you something," he said. "I've been practicing law for 20 years. I've handled estates for millionaires, multi-millionaires, even a few people worth 9 figures. But I've never seen anything like this. Your husband built this portfolio from nothing, from $500 in 1993 to $1.7 billion today. No inheritance, no lottery, no lucky breaks. Just patient, brilliant investing over 3 decades. He looked up from the papers. "The financial media is going to call him the greatest investor most people have never heard of. They're going to write books about him. Business schools will teach his strategy. And through it all, he was a janitor. He mopped floors and emptied trash and never told anyone what he was building." Elena couldn't speak. The magnitude of what Robert had accomplished and hidden was too vast to process. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why didn't he tell me?" Patterson picked up another letter from the box. "I think this one explains it." The letter was dated December 2023, just 4 months before Robert died. "My dearest Elena, I'm 62 years old today. In 3 years, I'll retire from Riverside Technical, and when I do, I'm going to tell you everything. Why did I wait so long? Why did I keep this secret for 30 years? The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I told you when we had $10,000 and then the market crashed and we lost it, you would see me as a failure. Afraid that if I told you when we had $100,000, you would worry every time the market dropped. Afraid that if I told you at any point before the work was complete, you would carry the burden of this secret with me. I wanted to give you the gift without the weight. I wanted to say, here, my love, is security for the rest of your life. Here is enough that Maria and her children will never struggle. Here is proof that the janitor you married had more to offer than a mop and a smile. Was I right to wait? I don't know. But I did what I thought was best. In 3 years, we'll retire. We'll travel. You've always wanted to see Paris. We'll set up scholarships for immigrant students. We'll help people the way we wished someone had helped us. And I'll finally be able to say, Elena, everything I built for you. Every share of stock, every dollar of dividend, every hour spent reading financial reports instead of watching TV with you. It was all for you. I hope you'll forgive me for keeping this secret. I hope you'll understand. I did it out of love. Forever yours, Roberto. Elena read the letter 3 times. Then she carefully folded it, held it to her chest, and made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He was going to tell me in 3 years, she said. 3 years. And he died 3 weeks before he could even set up the proper will arrangements. Actually, Patterson said carefully, the will was already legally valid. What he wanted to do at our appointment was update it with recent account information and discuss estate planning strategies. But the original will he filed 30 years ago is ironclad. Everything was always going to you. Elena looked around the motel room, the stained carpet, the flickering TV, the bathroom door that didn't quite close. The contrast between where she was and what she'd just learned was so absurd it defied comprehension. What do I do now? She asked. Patterson smiled. First, we check you out of this motel. I've already reserved a suite at the Riverside Grand Hotel, on the firm. Don't worry about the cost. Then tomorrow, we start the process of transferring assets into your name. By next week, you'll have full access to everything. And then? Then, Mrs. Martinez, you get to decide what to do with $1.7 billion and the rest of your life. The suite at the Riverside Grand Hotel had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a bathroom larger than Elena's old living room, and a bed so comfortable she almost couldn't sleep in it. Almost. After 2 nights in the Riverside Inn, Elena slept for 12 hours straight. She woke up on December 28th to find Maria sitting in a chair by the window, watching the sunrise, crying quietly. Mia! Maria turned, her face wet with tears. I keep thinking about Papa, how he worked so hard, how he never complained, how he used to bring home leftover pastries from the college cafeteria because he said they were throwing them out anyway, and we thought it was just him being frugal. They probably were throwing them out, Elena said gently. But he could have afforded to buy us anything, any restaurant, any food, anything we wanted. And instead, he brought home day-old pastries and acted like they were treats. Maria's voice cracked. Was he unhappy? Did we fail him somehow? Elena got out of bed and sat beside her daughter. Your father was the happiest man I ever knew. He loved his work, not the mopping, but the thinking, the investing, the building. He loved us, and he loved knowing he was building something extraordinary that we would one day discover. But he died before he could tell us. Yes, Elena said, and that's the tragedy we have to carry. But Maria, look at what he gave us. Not the money, though that's real, but the example. Your father showed us that dignity doesn't come from your job title, that patience and strategy can accomplish what desperation never can, that real wealth is built in silence, not displayed on social media. Maria wiped her eyes. What are you going to do with it? The money? I don't know yet, Elena admitted, but I know what I won't do. I won't waste it. I won't squander what your father built, and I won't let his story be forgotten. By January 2nd, the story had leaked. Janitor leaves widow, $1.7 billion was the headline in the Riverside Times. The article, written by financial reporter Susan Chen, detailed Robert Martinez's incredible journey from immigrant dishwasher to custodial worker to billionaire investor. A story that seemed impossible but was supported by meticulous documentation. Within hours, the story went national, then international. The phone in Elena's hotel suite rang constantly. Reporters, TV producers, distant relatives she hadn't heard from in decades, financial advisors offering their services, charities requesting donations, and strangers with sob stories and business propositions. Daniel Patterson handled most of it, but eventually, Elena agreed to one interview with Susan Chen, the reporter who'd broken the story respectfully. They met in the hotel's private dining room. "Mrs. Martinez, thank you for agreeing to speak with me," Chen began. "I know this must be overwhelming." "That's an understatement," Elena said. "Can I ask, did you have any idea? Any hint that your husband was doing this?" Elena thought about all the times Robert had been late for dinner because he was working on paperwork. All the financial magazines she'd seen him reading, thinking he just had an interest in current events. All the times he'd seemed distracted, and she'd assumed he was tired from work. "No," Elena said honestly. "I had no idea, and I think that's the point. Robert didn't want me to know, because he didn't want me to worry. He carried the risk alone so I could have the reward without the anxiety. Was that fair to you? To keep such a significant secret?" Elena considered this. "Fair? I don't know, but I understand why he did it. My husband grew up poor. I grew up poor. We knew what it meant to worry about money every single day. Robert found a way to build security without adding to my worries. Was it paternalistic? Maybe. Was it done from love? Absolutely. What will you do with the estate? I'm still figuring that out," Elena said. "But I can tell you what Robert wanted. He wanted to help immigrant families. He wanted to create scholarships for students whose parents work service jobs. He wanted to prove that anyone, regardless of their job title, can build something extraordinary if they're patient and strategic." She paused, then added, "And I'm going to honor that vision. This isn't my money. It's our money. Robert's and mine. And I'm going to use it the way he would have wanted." The interview was published on January 5th. By January 6th, Elena had received over 40,000 letters, emails, and social media messages. Elena established the Roberto Martinez Foundation on February 14th, 2025, Valentine's Day, the day she and Robert always celebrated their love. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide education and opportunity to people from backgrounds like theirs. The Roberto Martinez Scholarship Program would provide full-ride scholarships to children of service workers, janitors, custodians, house cleaners, food service workers, maintenance staff, students whose parents' work was essential but undervalued. The program would fund 1,000 scholarships annually, full tuition, room and board, books, and a living stipend. Everything Robert and Elena had wished someone had provided for them. Cost, approximately $50 million per year. The foundation would also provide small business loans for immigrant entrepreneurs, financial literacy education in underserved communities, support for community colleges and trade schools, emergency assistance funds for families facing eviction or medical debt, investment education programs teaching Robert strategies. Elena didn't do this alone. She hired a team: financial advisors, education experts, nonprofit leaders, people who understood both wealth management and social justice. But she remained actively involved. This wasn't just writing checks. It was building the legacy Robert had dreamed of, but never lived to create. In March, Elena did something unexpected. She bought her old house, not to live in. She'd purchased a comfortable but modest home in a different neighborhood, but to transform into something else. The house on Primrose Street became the Roberto Martinez Financial Literacy Center, a place where working-class families could learn investing basics, financial planning, and wealth-building strategies. Free classes, every week, taught by volunteer financial advisors who'd been moved by Robert's story. Computers available for research and learning. A library stocked with the same resources Robert had used. On opening day, Elena stood in the living room where she'd been served an eviction notice and addressed a crowd of reporters, community members, and the first class of students. "My husband died in this neighborhood," she said. "He worked at Riverside Technical College for 33 years, and many of you probably saw him around campus, but never really saw him. He was invisible, the way service workers often are." She paused, looking around the room. But Robert saw things we didn't see. He saw the future in companies we'd never heard of. He saw opportunity and patience, and he saw value in work that others dismissed. This center is named for him because he proved something important. Your job doesn't define your worth or your potential. A janitor can be a billionaire. A housekeeper can be a future entrepreneur. Anyone from any background, with the right knowledge and enough patience, can build something extraordinary. She smiled. Robert would have been too humble to have a building named after him. But I'm not that humble. I want everyone to know that the man who mopped these floors was one of the greatest investors of his generation. And I want to make sure his knowledge doesn't die with him. The crowd applauded. Among them was Deputy Morrison, the same man who'd served Elena the eviction notice. He approached her afterward. "Mrs. Martinez, I just want to say, that day, serving you that eviction notice, it was one of the worst days of my career. I had no idea." "You were doing your job," Elena said gently, "just like Robert did his. No apology needed. Still, if there's anything I can do to help with the foundation." Elena smiled. "Actually, there is. We need volunteers to help with outreach, connecting with families who might benefit from our programs. Interested?" Morrison's face lit up. "Absolutely." In May, Maria sat Elena down for a serious conversation. "Mama, I need to tell you something. About Papa." Elena's heart clenched. "What is it?" "When I was 13, I snuck into Papa's papers. You know how teenagers are, nosy about everything. I found some investment statements. Not the full portfolio, just some accounts. I asked him about them." Elena stared at her daughter. "What did he say?" "He swore me to secrecy, said he was investing for our future, but that you couldn't know because you'd worry. He made me promise not to tell." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I've been carrying this guilt since your eviction. I knew there was money. I didn't know how much, but I knew it existed. And I watched you suffer, and I didn't say anything because I'd promised him." Elena pulled her daughter into her arms. "Oh, mija, you were 13. You were keeping a promise to your father. You didn't know he would die. You didn't know. I should have told you. After he died, I should have." "You were grieving," Elena said firmly, "and confused. And honestly, if you'd told me there was some money in investment accounts, I probably would have thought it was his retirement fund, or something small. I never would have imagined this. Are you angry?" "No," Elena said honestly. "I'm sad that you've been carrying this guilt. But I'm not angry. Your father put you in an impossible position. That's on him, not you." They sat together in silence, processing all the secrets and revelations that had defined the past 6 months. "Mama?" Maria said eventually. What do you think Papa would say if he could see what you're doing with the foundation?" Elena smiled. "I think he'd be proud. And I think he'd say I'm spending money too quickly and should be more conservative." They both laughed. But he'd also understand that this is my way of honoring him. He built the fortune in silence. I'm making sure the world knows his name. On December 24th, 2025, exactly 1 year after her eviction, Elena stood in the Roberto Martinez Financial Literacy Center, preparing for a special event. The center was hosting a Christmas dinner for families facing housing insecurity. People who, like Elena a year ago, were one crisis away from homelessness. 150 people filled the space. Families, children, elderly folks living on the edge. They ate a meal catered by a local restaurant. Elena had made sure the restaurant workers were well tipped. They received gifts for the children, and they received information about resources available through the Martinez Foundation. After dinner, Elena addressed the crowd. "1 year ago today, I was evicted from my home," she began. "I packed my life into garbage bags and spent Christmas Eve in a motel, wondering how I'd ended up homeless at 59 years old after a lifetime of hard work." She saw recognition in many faces, people who knew exactly that feeling. "I thought my husband had failed me. I thought we'd done something wrong, that we should have planned better, saved more, somehow avoided the catastrophe that medical debt and grief had created. Then I learned the truth. My husband hadn't failed me. He'd been building something extraordinary, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. He died before he could tell me, but he left me everything I needed. Not just money, but a philosophy." Elena gestured around the room. "Robert taught me that real wealth isn't about looking rich. It's about building security, one careful choice at a time. It's about patience, strategy, and thinking long-term, even when short-term needs are screaming for attention. Most of you are in situations where long-term thinking feels impossible. I understand that. When you're worried about next month's rent, it's hard to think about investing for retirement. When you're choosing between food and medicine, building wealth feels like a fantasy. But I want you to know something. My husband started with $500, just $500 in 1993, and over 30 years, through consistent investing and patient strategy, he turned it into $1.7 billion. The room was silent, everyone absorbing this. I'm not saying you'll become billionaires. Most people won't. But I am saying that small, consistent actions compound over time in ways that seem impossible until they happen. Robert proved that. And the foundation exists to help you learn what he learned, to give you the tools and knowledge he wished someone had given us." She paused. "You're not here because you failed. You're here because circumstances, medical debt, job loss, systemic inequality, created challenges no amount of personal responsibility could prevent. Robert and I faced those same challenges. The difference is, he found a way to build something despite them. The foundation can't solve all your problems, but we can provide education, resources, emergency assistance, and a community of people who believe in you. We can teach you what Robert taught himself, that your current job doesn't define your future wealth, that patience is a superpower, that building something real is more valuable than looking successful." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "My husband couldn't be here to tell you his story, so I'm telling it for him. And I'm making sure his knowledge doesn't die with him. I'm making sure every service worker, every person society overlooks, knows that they are capable of extraordinary things. Merry Christmas, and thank you for letting me honor my husband's memory by serving you tonight." The applause was thunderous. Several people were crying. After the event, as Elena helped clean up, old habits die hard, a woman approached her. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Gloria. I work as a housekeeper. Actually, I think I may have cleaned your old house once or twice when the previous owners lived there. Nice to meet you, Gloria. I just wanted to say, your husband's story gives me hope. I've been cleaning houses for 20 years. I've got $100 saved up. I always thought it wasn't enough to invest, that investing was for rich people. Elena smiled. Robert started with $500. You've already got more than he did. Really? Really? Come to one of our classes. We'll teach you everything Robert taught himself. You might not become a billionaire, but you can absolutely build security for your future. Gloria's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Just thank you for not giving up, for turning this tragedy into something that helps people like me. After Gloria left, Maria came over. Mama, that was beautiful. It was true, Elena said simply. They stood together, mother and daughter, in the building that had been both Elena's lowest point and Robert's final gift, and watched the families file out into the night, not rich, not transformed, but maybe, just maybe, carrying a seed of hope that hadn't been there before. Elena Martinez died at age 83, 24 years, after discovering her husband's fortune. At the time of her death, she had given away $1.2 billion through the Roberto Martinez Foundation. The foundation had provided 24,000 full-ride scholarships to children of service workers, $340 million in small business loans to immigrant entrepreneurs, 97% repayment rate, financial literacy education to over 400,000 people, emergency assistance to 15,000 families facing eviction or medical debt, support for 200 community colleges and trade schools, investment clubs in 50 cities, teaching Robert strategies. Elena left the remaining $500 million to continue the foundation's work in perpetuity, but the numbers, while impressive, don't capture the real legacy. The real legacy was the janitor who became a billionaire without anyone noticing, the widow who transformed tragedy into purpose, the daughter who learned that secrets kept from love are different from secrets kept from shame, the thousands of families who discovered that their current circumstances didn't define their future possibilities, and the enduring proof that patience, strategy, and quiet dignity can accomplish what flash and noise never will. Robert Martinez mopped floors for 33 years and built a billion-dollar fortune. Elena Martinez was evicted on Christmas Eve and created a foundation that changed lives. Together, they proved something the world needed to learn: that greatness doesn't always announce itself, that service work has dignity, and that the people society overlooks might be the ones building something extraordinary. The Roberto Martinez Financial Literacy Center still stands on Primrose Street, teaching Robert's philosophy to new generations. And in the lobby, there's a plaque with Robert's photo, him in his janitor's uniform, smiling that smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the world, and these words, Roberto Martinez, 1965, 20-24, janitor, investor, visionary. He built in silence what others only talked about, because in the end, that's the lesson. Not that everyone can become a billionaire, but that everyone has value, everyone has potential, and the work you do doesn't define the wealth you can build. Robert Martinez proved it. Elena Martinez made sure the world remembered it, and thousands of families discovered it was true.